It's already July? The season's half over. How's it going, everybody? My name is Eric and welcome to Out of the Groove, the show about NASCAR where every week we talk about all the things going on in the sport, and this week we're officially at the halfway point of the NASCAR season. I know those first 18 races just blew by, so I thought today would be a good day to take a look at the point standings, talk about some of the guys on the bubble, talk about some guys who might be in some high pressure situations these next few weeks, and I know that technically it's the halfway point of the season. We're 18 races into a 36 race schedule, but I know we're technically 2/3 of the way through the regular season. There's only 9 races left until the playoffs start, so I know maybe I'm a little late there, but we're going to talk a lot about the playoffs today and a lot about the point standings. So without further ado, let's dive right in. A smart thing to do with this episode would be to refresh everyone's memory about what the current point standings look like. So there you have them. This is, of course, factoring in the wins. This is basically what the playoff grid would currently look like. That's why you got Eric Jones up so high. That's why Austin Dillon's up there so high for whatever reason. That's why the standings look the way they do. So stacking up based on wins, you got the big 3 there at the top. No surprise there. And you got the Hendrick cars down there near the bottom, which I guess is also surprising. Well, I guess at this point we started to get used to it the last few months. And so now I think Hendrick Motorsports might be a good place to start. One of the big mid-season takeaways for me personally is that Hendrick Motorsports, 18 races in, still doesn't look quite right. I mean, obviously they have 0 wins, but with Truex and Busch and Harvick sucking them all up, that's not too shocking. But the shocking thing is that they don't have any of their 4 cars in the top 13. Not even the top 10, not even the top 5, the top 13. They're 14th, 15th, and 16th, and William Byron's down there in 21st. That's not the Hendrick Motorsports we've become accustomed to seeing race the last couple decades. They had a brief stretch about a month and a half, 2 months ago where they had a couple of races in a row that they all ran top 5, top 10 and looked decent. But I said it back then, Hendrick needed to do it more consistently before I really started to buy them as contenders, and they failed to do it. So Hendrick's still struggling, and I don't know, they still have a little ways to go if they want to have any hopes of running with the top 3 or 4. Another huge thing to talk about at this point in the season is the big 3. They're here to stay. I want to read you some stats here really quick, some very general stats, but there's some pretty eye-opening stats to show you how dominant these 3 guys have been. Kevin Harvick, Kyle Busch, and Martin Truex Jr. have combined to win 13 out of the 18 points-paying races this year. Remember, Harvick also won the All-Star race, so these guys have basically owned victory lane. They've been splitting it like a 3-bedroom apartment. Truex and Busch lead the series with 3 poles each. Harvick has 2 poles, which puts him in a tied for 3rd place with a bunch of other guys. So they're basically the top 3 in poles. They have a combined 37 top 5s. They're the top 3 in top 5s, and they're 3 of the top 4 in top 10s. These guys have been good at every track, every different type of track. Even during this wreckfest we had at Daytona last weekend, late in stage 3, late in the race, you had both Martin Truex Jr. and Kevin Harvick leading the thing. They just find the lead no matter where it's hiding. And I think at this point, 18 races is a large enough sample size, it's fair to say that they're here to stay. With as many playoff and bonus points they've stacked up, I think right now it's basically a guarantee that at least 2 of them are going to make it to Homestead. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that Busch, Truex, Harvick are all going to make it to Homestead. You know, that'd be 3 of the 4 spots. They'd have to all be pretty consistent. But at this point, with as many bonus points as they have, I am very confident. I can basically guarantee you that at least 2 of those guys will be in the championship race. We've talked about the big 3. Now let's talk about some of the, outside challengers, drivers that are maybe just a little behind those big 3 guys, but maybe have a shot to shake things up when the playoffs arrive. Clint Bowyer and Joey Logano both have wins this year. Bowyer has 2, Logano 1 at Talladega, and they've both been pretty consistent in points, and that is very surprising and very impressive given that neither of them made the playoffs last year. I feel like we don't talk enough about these guys, especially Logano, I think because he's just been kind of quiet this year, but the fact that he didn't even make the playoffs last year and he's in the top 5 in points and has a win and is clearly going to be a threat in the playoffs, I think that's impressive. And same goes for Bowyer. He didn't make the playoffs last year either, and he's only on the 2nd year. He's only in the 2nd year with this new team. So I think they deserve a lot of credit, and they definitely have a chance to shake things up in the playoffs. I expect those guys in the round of 8. Kyle Larson is an interesting one to talk about because he's consistently been the best Chevy driver this year. However, he still doesn't have any wins, and he's currently 10th on the playoff grid. He's been up and down this year, and we've seen him be a part in some of the most exciting finishes this season, but he doesn't have a win yet. And right now, none of the Chevy Camaros really seem like consistent top 5 contenders. Now, Kyle Larson is excellent at Homestead, so if Kyle Larson manages to make it to Homestead, I think he will be be a very tough guy to beat. But he's got to get to Homestead first. We saw how last year he ran into issues in the round of 12 and was eliminated earlier than I think we expected him to. That could definitely happen again. So Larson's got to really focus on making it to Homestead, because if he makes it to Homestead, forget about how many races Truex, Kyle Busch, Harvick have won. Larson might be the favorite because he is so good at those big fast tracks, at running the high side, and that's how you do well at Homestead. So if I'm Larson, it's all about getting to that final race. Doesn't matter how you do it, doesn't matter who you got to make mad to do it, what you got to do, but you got to get to Homestead, because if you do, something magical might happen. So those are some of your top contenders to think about maybe when these playoffs roll around. One of the big storylines obviously this year has been the young drivers filling the shoes of a lot of established veteran drivers, and they really took a big step forward this last weekend when Erik Jones, in his second year driving that 20 car now for JGR, got his first career Cup Series win this last weekend. It's really been the first big success these young drivers have had this year, and it only took them half the season. So it's kind of been slow going, some late bloomers here, but that being said, we do have 3 or 4 pretty talented young drivers currently in the top 16 in points that, you never know, might make some noise. Ryan Blaney comes to mind. He's been driving for Penske, who has consistently been a little bit behind Stewart Haas, JGR, maybe, Truex in the 78, but they're not too far off. They're lying in the weeds. I talked about how Logano's been good this year. I haven't mentioned Keselowski, but he does not have a win yet. However, he's also been pretty solid, and, he's a former champion. We can't count him out. So Ryan Blaney is driving a solid Penske car and has been close to, winning a couple times this year. Chase Elliott and Alex Bowman, they're 15th and 16th in points right now. They're driving those Hendrick Chevys. Obviously, we know Chase Elliott has what it takes to get to Homestead. He should have made it last season, if not for what happened to him at Martinsville. So you know that there's, these guys have some potential, have some talent, but they gotta, their teams are the ones I don't feel confident in their teams right now. Stumbled over my words right now, but my point is the only young drivers I really feel confident in right now are Ryan Blaney and Kyle Larson. I might throw Erik Jones into that list. I mean, he won at Daytona and he's finished top 10 the last 3 races, so maybe they've really found something and they're starting to really become consistent, because that's been the problem with Jones. He's been so inconsistent this year, but maybe they finally found the consistency they needed, and maybe Erik Jones could emerge as a round of 8 contender. I don't think he's going to be a championship contender this year, but he could still make, he can make waves. But right now, Blaney and Larson are the only guys I really feel like have any sort of chance of running or possibly besting Truex, Harvick, Kyle Busch. I don't think they're the favorites to beat them in any week, but they're the guys that, something goes their way, they could do it. I'm not quite feeling that yet about Erik Jones, about Alex Bowman, or about Chase Elliott, but that could change. So to me, those all are the top biggest storylines from this season so far, especially at the midway point. I think those are all the big talking points. I want to wrap up today's episode briefly by doing something I did several months ago earlier in the season, where I have my little NASCAR stress pressure meters right here. I'm going to take several drivers that are kind of right around the playoff bubble right now, and I'm going to stick them onto this little pressure meter and tell you guys how stressed, how much pressure I think they definitely should be under right now going into these final 9 weeks before we get to the playoffs. And so I'll kind of go in numerical order here. I'll start with 14th place in points, Jimmie Johnson. Now, Jimmie Johnson's in an interesting spot here because he is 14th in points. He does have a pretty big cushion to 17th. However, he's Jimmie Johnson. And the possibility that Jimmie Johnson could miss the NASCAR playoffs, which is honestly not impossible right now, I think that alone means that he's got a lot of stress, should have a lot of pressure on him right now. I'm going to give Jimmie Johnson a 70%. I think he has got a significant amount of pressure on him going into these last 9 weeks. Not so much because I think he's going to miss the playoffs. I think he'll make the playoffs. I think he'll hang in there. I still think there's a good chance he wins a race at some point. But the stats lately have not been there. He's gone 4 straight races now without a top 10 finish. Typically, Jimmie Johnson has struggled in the past over these summer months, so I don't really get the feeling that he's going to improve much the next few weeks. And if these young guys behind him start to really mount some consistency, Jimmie Johnson could be in a rough spot. And the fact that he's Jimmie Johnson, a 7-time champion, the fact that he could maybe miss the playoffs to some of these rookies behind him and young guns, that would be really, really huge. That would be a huge, developing story in Jimmie Johnson's, kind of declining career we've seen this year. So I think he's got a significant amount of pressure. I'll move to 15th place now on the playoff grid, Chase Elliott. Now, Chase Elliott, I feel really bad for. Because while he still has a pretty good points cushion, Chase Elliott has maybe unintentionally, maybe inadvertently adopted one of the largest and most passionate fan bases in all of NASCAR. When Jeff Gordon retired and Chase Elliott took over that 24 car, he adopted millions of hardcore fans. And while it's been 2.5 seasons now and he still does not have a Cup Series win, a lot of these fans still stick by him and still plan and still hope and still believe that he's got a shot to get it done. You know, the ultimate goal, win a championship. But the pressure has consistently been going up for him. Each week he doesn't win. Eric Jones, who's only been in the series a year and a half, already now has a win. The more that Chase Elliott goes without winning, the longer he goes, the more and more that pressure is going to amp up. And I think this season, not only has he not won, but his finishes have been worse than the last couple of years as well. Mainly, I think, due to Chevy's struggles. So now, not only has he not won a race this year, but he's in danger of not even making the playoffs. And for all those reasons I just stated, as unfair as it may be to put that much pressure on Chase Elliott, he's got to be feeling 90% pressure right now. I don't really know what it means when I say 90% pressure, but my point is he's got to be feeling a lot of heat right now. And it's not fair for us to put that much pressure on him. He's, 22 years old, I think? He's only in his third season. Chevy's struggled this year. I mean, Jimmie Johnson can't even do anything in the cars they're driving right now, so it's unfair to put this much pressure on him, but God, it's just the way it is. You just feel like every week he doesn't win or doesn't run up front is another week that there's just more and more heat being added underneath his seat right now. And I feel bad for him, but I just gotta say, he's gotta be under a ton of pressure, because if he misses the playoffs this year, that could be devastating for his brand and, of course, for his fan base. So I'm rooting for him. I mean, he had a really strong 8-race run where he finished top 12 in 8 straight races just a few weeks ago. That recently got snapped. So we know he's capable of running off some consistent finishes. So I believe in him. I think he'll make it in. But God, if he doesn't, it could be devastating. So I think there's a lot of pressure there. We'll ratchet things down a little bit for this next one. 16th on the grid is Alex Bowman. And I'll just go ahead and say it, I think Alex Bowman's feeling about a 30% pressure right here. Which might be confusing because he does only have a 19-point cushion. He's right on the bubble, right there. He's right barely above the cut line to making the playoffs. But if you ask me, I feel like Alex Bowman isn't feeling that much pressure. Obviously, he wants to make the playoffs, but keep in mind, guys, he's driving that 88 car. And last season, the 88 was driven by Dale Earnhardt Jr. and finished 21st in points. And the fact that Chevy has kind of as a manufacturer been worse this year than last year, and Bowman, a relatively young, inexperienced driver, is sitting there in the playoffs right now, I think is a victory all in itself. So I think he's already basically overachieved this year. It'd be great if he made the playoffs, but I don't even think that's a necessity. He's definitely feeling some pressure because you love to make the playoffs. That's huge for your sponsors and your fans and everything. But I think he's already basically overachieved this year. He's been the most consistent Hendrick car, especially lately. He's had 3 straight top 10 finishes, so if he can just continue that, he'll be okay. But, you know, I just feel like there's not that much pressure on Bowman right now. Chase Elliott's got all this fanfare. Jimmie Johnson's obviously a legend, so they've got a lot of pressure on them. Alex Bowman's just kind of sliding here under the radar, and I just feel like he doesn't have that much pressure. We'll move on to 17th, where we have Ricky Stenhouse Jr., who is 19 points out of the playoffs. And now I think his pressure definitely goes up a little bit after this chaotic weekend he had at Daytona, but I still don't know about him. The only somewhat realistic chance he has of maybe getting a win this year would be at Bristol in a few weeks, but I don't even know about that. Right now, I think Ricky Stenhouse Jr. is feeling about 60% pressure because he is the one Roush car that could make the playoffs. Maybe he could lean on his new teammate Matt Kenseth for some help. I don't know if that would really make any sort of difference. But right now, Ricky Stenhouse Jr. is on a mission to prove himself. Undoubtedly, he's seen all the fan reaction to how he raced last weekend at Daytona. He's heard what some of the drivers have had to say. Not that many people were super thrilled with him. So I think he feels like he's got a little bit of a chip on his shoulder now because of that. He wants to prove everyone wrong. But I think he also wants to prove everyone wrong and prove that he wasn't a fluke last year when he won 2 races and made the playoffs and actually advanced to the round of 12. Because yeah, Ricky Stenhouse did that last year. He made it to the round of 12. And I think he's putting a lot of pressure on himself at least to, you know, kind of try to replicate that, or at least try to make the playoffs again to show that he can get it done. And I bet Roush as an organization has definitely got some pressure because he's their only full-time car driver right now, the only guy that's got a chance at making the playoffs, and so I think they'd love to get him in there. The last one I want to briefly talk about, and I'm going to go down a little further on the list to 20th place, and that's Daniel Suarez. Right now, Daniel Suarez is 109 points outside the top 16. So his chances of making the playoffs are almost 0. He basically has to win. But I'm going to say Daniel Suarez has at least 50% pressure on himself right now. The seat in that 19 car is definitely starting to boil a little bit underneath his butt. And I think it's definitely gotten a little bit warmer now that Eric Jones has a win. Remember 2016, Carl Edwards drove that 19 car into the championship race and honestly came within one rough restart of winning the championship in that year. A couple months later, they announced Daniel Suarez will be in that car, and to be fair, last season Daniel Suarez was not ready. And while he definitely showed improvement throughout the season, you could just tell, he was a little overmatched, but by the end of the season, you felt like he was a little more comfortable and, he looked somewhat competent. But now here we are into his second season, and it seems like he has stopped improving. The results are the same or even maybe a little worse than they were last year. And at the end of the day, I think there's going to come a point where the money's going to run out, where JGR is not going to want to keep him in that car. JGR has Christopher Bell in the Xfinity Series, who's probably a top championship contender down there. There's going to come a point where they can't keep him down there forever, and Suarez likely could be the first guy to go. I know he's very marketable. I love Daniel Suarez. He's one of my favorite drivers. That's why I'm really hoping that I know he probably won't make the playoffs this year, and he doesn't have to, but he needs to show some serious improvement the second half of this season. He needs to lead laps. And in this case, I don't think it's unfair to put that much pressure on him, because he's driving top equipment, and he's been consistently the worst driver on that team and the worst finishing driver on that team. And I've been kind of making a lot of excuses for him this season, because I thought at least early in this year, a lot of the finishes he was getting didn't really represent how well he ran. But there comes a point where you gotta start to finish better than you run. The best drivers are able to take a 10th place car and finish third with it, and I don't see that from Suarez this year. I know he's very marketable, he's a very likable guy. Everyone likes Daniel Suarez as far as I can tell. Nobody seems to dislike him. He's got great partners. Eris is sponsoring the crap out of him. Stanley's sponsoring the crap out of him. I know for a fact, I believe Eris is signed on through next season for a lot of it, so I think that's likely means Suarez will be in the car at least next year. But after next year, all bets are off. And I think this is an important turning point for that 19 team. The second half of this year for Daniel Suarez needs to be better than anything else he's done in the Cup Series so far. He doesn't have to make the playoffs. I don't think he will. He's 109 points out, for Pete's sake. But he's got to start running top 10. He's got to start leading some laps here and there. He has to, or his career might be cut short in a couple of years. Anyway, wow, this turned out to be a really jam-packed episode. I'm really glad with how this came out, though. Thank you guys so much for watching today's episode. I really appreciate it. Thanks, of course, to our Patreon sponsors of Out of the Groove. Thank you guys so much for keeping this show rolling. You guys can check out a link in the description so that you could also become a sponsor of the show. Double E Cup Series came out earlier this week. I hope you guys checked that out, because I was really proud of that. Tournament of Champions has officially started. You can follow me on Twitter, follow me on Instagram. All those links are down in the description. Leave a comment. Let me know what the biggest story, the biggest surprise of this season has been to you so far. And yeah, I look forward to reading all that. I look forward to seeing all your tweets. And yeah, thanks everyone for watching. I'll see you guys again later this week.